Welcome to JK Tells a Story, where real-life dramas unfold. Sit back and enjoy today's tale. I had driven down the Blue Ridge Parkway probably a dozen times and never noticed it. On my right stood a small white farmhouse on the side of an old highway that ran through the mountains of southwestern Virginia. This road had several sections, including the Old Thunder Road, but in my grandfather's younger days it was simply the runner's route, a winding dirt track through the Appalachian foothills that served as the basis for today's NASCAR culture. Moonshiners. The house was neat, freshly whitewashed, straight as a pin, with a board and batten fence enclosing the pasture on the side. A patched radiator hose and steam billowing through the hood of my truck told me I didn't have much time left on this stretch of road. So I pulled into a gravel lot and parked halfway up the road to the house. "Hey, anybody home?" I called out, knocking on the wooden door. Mountain folks can be a bit peculiar with strangers, but once they get to know you better, you can't find a better group of people. Nevertheless, just in case, I kept my distance on the porch. After a few moments, a face hidden from view by an upstairs window responded. "Yes? Who are you and what do you want?" A woman's voice answered. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Ethan McAllister from Roanoke, and I was hoping I could fix my truck and get some water from you. I have a burst radiator hose that I patched quickly a few miles ago, but it won't take me any farther down the road." "Wait here," she told me and disappeared from the window. I looked around and noticed how clean and neat everything was. All the fencing was in good condition, the porch was freshly painted, and there was a garden on the side. When I turned around to the door, there were two large German Shepherd dogs standing in the doorway, silent and obedient to their master. "As long as you behave, the dogs will leave you alone," the woman said and opened the door in front of me. "Come on in. Do you need anything to drink?" "Yes, please. A glass of water, ma'am." "Are you related to the McAllisters of Floyd County? There's a whole clan of them in the hollers." She gave me a look. "No, ma'am, at least not that I know of. My father's family goes back several generations in Roanoke, and no one's ever talked about relatives in Floyd County. But I guess you never know." She brought me a glass of water and motioned for me to sit down as the dogs settled and watched my every move. The cool, icy water quenched my dusty thirst, and the breeze from the fan dried my sweat-soaked shirt. "My name is Miranda Hartwell, and that couple over there is Ranger and Scout." The two dogs continued to sit with their tongues hanging off the corners of their mouths. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Miranda. I was hoping you might have some materials I could use to make a short, flexible tube, something like rubber. I noticed a collection of old cars over there in the pasture." "Oh hell, you can have whatever you need if it'll do you any good." "I appreciate that, Miranda," I replied and got up from the table slowly so as not to startle the dogs. It didn't help. Both dogs got on all fours before Miranda uttered the sit command. They both went back to their haunches. She walked out the door with me and the two dogs, and I admired her attractive figure as she walked down the porch. I estimated her to be in her early 30s, and her long dark hair was gathered in a ponytail and tucked into a cap. Work boots, tight jeans, and an old t-shirt completed the look, along with a pair of bright blue eyes. Grabbing tools from my truck, we walked across the pasture to a collection of old cars parked behind a dilapidated barn. Digging around, I found some flexible steel and rubber hoses and clamps that allowed me to temporarily fix the truck. An hour later, my truck was ready to go. "It's getting close to dinner time. Why don't you come in and wash up and grab a bite to eat before you hit the road?" she asked with inviting sincerity. I hesitated at first, but I was hungry too, so I agreed. Besides, the delicious smells coming from the kitchen would have taken me captive no matter what protestations I made. I was not disappointed. Miranda prepared a dish of smoked pork chops, mashed potatoes, collard greens, and black-eyed peas, topped with hot, moist cornbread, followed by bread pudding and hot coffee. "Oh, Miss Miranda, that was the best pile of food I've had in years. I'm serious. It was nothing special." She tried to tone it down, but to no avail. "I don't have many guests here, and I like to cook, so I think you've come just in time." She tossed a couple of bites to the two dogs, who kept their eyes on me the entire time I was in the house. In one gulp, everything was eaten, and they continued their mission with long tongues sticking out of their mouths. About those old cars by your barn. You know, there are a few people who could take a couple of them if you wanted to sell them. She looked at me for a moment before looking away. They belong to my husband. Or rather, my ex-husband. They've been lying here since the day he left. Well, I know that one of them, a 65 Fairlane, is worth a lot of good money if you decide to part with it. The same goes for a 57 Ford pickup truck, I informed her. He's been gone for 2 years, and I suppose I should do something about it. A year ago, a guy from Charlottesville came by and offered to buy it for next to nothing. He took me for a fool, and I sent him on his way. Thinking back on it, she smiled, and it lit up the room. I helped her clean up the remains of dinner, and when I was done, I realized I had to get on the road if I wanted to make it before nightfall. I had only met this woman a few hours ago, but there was a graciousness about her that was disarming and appealing. I felt a slight disappointment at having to leave. Miss Miranda, I know someone who would be very interested in this 57 Ford if you'd like to consider selling it. I'd be happy to let him know. Let me give you my card, and if you think of it, give me a call. I'd love to come down here. I'd really enjoy it. I think she realized I was hinting at a return visit, but I left it in her hands for the moment. I had to get back on the road. We shook hands graciously, and I started the truck and turned back onto the Blue Ridge Parkway. I drove down Highway 221, which would take me to Roanoke, and kept thinking about the pretty woman in the white farmhouse. She told me her ex left 2 years ago. That's about the same time I gained ex status, and not a day seems to go by that I don't think about how bad things were and how damn good I had it back then. Of course, the people reminding me of that are the wrong people. I married my ex-wife 5 years before she left. Unlike Miranda's ex-husband, Paige Whitmore keeps coming back even though the papers have been done for a year and a half. I always thought it was a good 5 years, and Paige continues to claim that, but a lot of dark water has flowed under the bridge between then and now. When I first met her, she was just a 19-year-old waitress at a diner, and I was a 23-year-old handyman with no steady job, hauling truck parts all over 5 counties and 2 states to make a living. At least I was paying all the bills in my corner of the world. Paige could pay her car payments and still live at home. I asked her out on a date, but she turned me down as she was apparently dating some guy from Charlottesville. What she didn't know was that she was just a regular in his rotation and nothing more. By the time I made my next stop at a barbecue joint a few weeks later, their relationship was on hold. This time when I asked her out, she said yes. We had a good time, ate a burger each and with a 6-pack of beer in the truck, went to a bluegrass show up in Floyd and had a great time. It was so good that we repeated it a couple more times. Anyway, I popped the question a couple of months later, and we were married 3 months after that in an outdoor ceremony next to an old country church in Boone's Mill. A year later, we scraped together enough money to buy a little white frame house on a couple of acres south of town. It didn't have anything fancy, but it had enough room for a garden and a shed I could use as a workshop. There were no kids at that point, and Paige was enrolled in the local community college, continuing to work at the barbecue place during the day and a couple of evenings during the week. I spent most days on the road, delivering and taking orders, occasionally staying overnight in the neighboring counties. Life continued like that for the next couple of years until Paige graduated from college and got a job as a shift nurse at the local county hospital. I was still traveling daily and was promoted to regional manager. It wasn't much of a step up on the road, but it was a better paying job. I received a portion of the commission on all sales. Since we were both working full-time now and Paige was working shifts, we had to make the most of the time we had together. During the week, she usually had to cover for someone else, and every 12 weeks she switched to night work with 12-hour shifts. The only upside was the pay raise. After a couple of years, she was making almost as much as I was, and we were able to double up on the house payments. On weekends when her shifts allowed, we'd hit a couple of night spots in Charlottesville, usually with 2 or 3 other couples we knew. A few people from her work started joining us as well, and eventually we formed a weekend hangout of about a dozen people who got together in one form or another on a fairly regular basis. One of the places we frequented was a dance hall on Preston Avenue in Charlottesville. It was a long, bottleneck kind of place with a lot of atmosphere, and we all fit in quite well. We went there in pairs, most of us were married, and before the night was over I would end up dancing with some of the others and Paige would do the same. I always thought there was nothing wrong with that. Sometimes people danced with folks they knew from elsewhere or went to school with. I did that too, and Paige did too. Like I said, there was nothing wrong with it. We all went home with the people we came with. But as with anything, eventually some troublemaker comes along and ruins everything. A few months after we started going to this particular place, I was dancing with one of the girls at our table, a coworker of Paige's named Lisa, who somehow kept directing us to the other side of the dance floor. I didn't pay much attention to it because I was, by and large, innocent. When the next slow number came up, she left me on the floor and turned the heat up full blast. We were at the far end of the room from our table. Jesus, Lisa, what are you doing? Nothing you don't already want to do, from the feel of it. I was a young guy dancing with a girl, and she smelled great. Sure, the blood was flowing, and I'm sure that was the intention, but I was a happily married guy, and despite the possibilities, and there were many, I hadn't cheated and I wasn't going to. Lisa, I'm a one-woman man. If you weren't, I'm sure we'd be at my house by next week. But Paige will take care of that tonight. I smiled, trying not to blow her off. She only smiled back and said, "Oh, I'll get the chance someday." We changed the subject and finished the dance, after which I turned her back to her escort, a guy named Tom. Paige and a few others were still on the dance floor, and as I looked around, I noticed that she was dancing pretty damn close to some guy I'd never seen before. He was whispering something in her ear, and she was just smiling and giggling. Then he grabbed her, and she was clearly enjoying it. For a moment, I thought about getting up and breaking into the dance, but then I remembered Lisa's behavior. In hindsight, I should have intervened, but that was all in the past now. Someone ordered another round of drinks, and Paige returned to the table with her newfound dance partner. I feigned ignorance. She introduced him as Derek, an old friend from high school until his family moved to Charlottesville. I didn't like him from the start, though where his hand used to be probably played a part in that assessment. Maybe it was his cocky smirk as he looked at me with his hand on my wife's shoulder. But when Paige saw my reaction to him, she cooled down a bit and moved her hand away. He lingered for a few moments and then moved on, giving Paige a quick peck on the cheek and shaking my hand. I felt like squashing the little sucker, but I kept my composure. On the way back to the house, the conversation was expected. "Do you let every man run his hands over you when you dance with him, Paige?" "No more than you let a girl stroke you," she replied. This caught me off guard. Lisa deliberately moved us to the far end of the room. At that moment, I didn't think to look to see where you were. I didn't ask her to, and I nipped it right then and there. Well, neither did I, big boy. Do you get jealous every time a man thinks he has a shot at the impossible? She grinned as she said this and diffused the tension. Derek has about as much chance of getting me into bed as Lisa does with you. I mean, none. She was right. We'd both been hit on, and we needed to stop the jealousy game. We did so that night when we got home, and things seemed fine after that. For the next few months, things were good. We got together fairly regularly, splitting the driving duties among ourselves. One Saturday night, I was one of those assigned to drive, and the women in our group outnumbered the men 2-1. 4 guys were in the National Guard that weekend and couldn't make it. Paige and a few of the girls were slinging tequila and confidently on their way to getting hammered. The problem with Paige and tequila is a common one. She loses all her inhibitions. In other words, she's not going to be easy to deal with. I tried my best to keep up with her and dance as much as I could, but the dance card was filling up with other girls who were performing solo that night, including Paige's friend Lisa. Having to keep an eye on Paige and the others while fending off Lisa's brazen advances, she went outside with the other girls to get some air. "Ethan, she's in good hands," Lisa whispered in my ear. Nevertheless, when the dance was over, I returned to the patio where the smokers were getting rid of their habits and puffing themselves silly. Paige and her friends continued to laugh merrily, so I left them alone and returned to the table. Most of the party was on the floor, so I hooked up with Lisa and another girl they worked with. They were both seriously tipsy, and the other girl was just plain drunk. "So, Ethan, Paige told us that you're well-equipped," said the drunkenly drunk girl. All I could do was laugh out loud. She was slurring every word, and all I could see on Lisa's face was a goofy grin. Then she inadvertently said something that quickly brought everything back to normal. I was the only sober one at the table. Drunks think everything around them is funny as hell and God knows don't know when to shut up. It's not fair that she has two of these and we have none. They both thought it was funny as hell and giggled until Lisa realized the importance of what was being said. I realized what was said by the way the words were coming out of that little woman's mouth. I ignored Lisa. Who else has one that big? Derek. Oops. I wasn't supposed to say that, was I? She mumbled, struggling to get the words out after Lisa threw her an angry look. I guess Lisa, even in her drunken state, understood the implications of what was said at the table. I got up to go to the men's room while Lisa tried to intervene. Not now, Lisa, I said firmly. Now, the comments could have meant something very different from what I thought they meant. I didn't know if two drunken women were giggling at the fact that my wife had two men, me and someone named Derek. It could have meant that she had been with him before we got together, or that she had been with him since we'd been together, or that she was seeing him now. Of course, it could have just been the ramblings of a drunk. It was getting close to closing time, and I needed to help corral everyone. So I gathered the drunken company on the patio, not missing the gathering of horny young men who had decided the pickings were ripe. The two of us designated drivers loaded everyone into 2 cars and hit the road. By the time Paige and I reached home, it was 2 in the morning, and I had to carry her like a sack to bed. I sat outside sipping my beer and thinking about the situation. If she was doing something as a one-off, I'd probably put up with it. But this wasn't a one-off, far from a one-off. The funny thing is, I knew she loved me, so I could put up with a one-time thing if she drank too much or something and didn't do it again. But if it was the same Derek from a few months ago, it wouldn't be a damn mistake. I stayed overnight on Tuesdays and Wednesdays every week for work. Tuesdays were Paige's day off, so if she was having an affair with someone, there was little chance of being caught. Sometimes the cruel master of fate plays his hand just right. Such was the case with my marriage. The following Tuesday night, I drove back to Roanoke instead of staying in Galax. I had a bag of barbecue and a few drinks and settled in to watch from the upper field across the street from our house. When I arrived, it was already 11 p.m., and Paige's car was gone. I'd called her in the evening as usual and let her know I'd be back late that night. She'd planned to stay home, watch TV, and maybe call her sister or someone before bed. Apparently, she'd run out to make that phone call. So I just sat there, leaning back in the truck with the window down, the radio on for the ball game, and the interior light off. About midnight, 2 sets of headlights drove down the road on the Roanoke side, slowed down, and turned into the yard. Paige's car stayed in its usual spot, and the other car parked right behind it. I didn't have to guess who it was. Derek, my dance floor nemesis. That damn and so even had the nerve to wear a cowboy hat. Everything happened as usual. The bedroom light came on, followed by the soft glow of the nightlights we'd placed by the bed. I was tempted to go home, but it wasn't time yet. I sat there, angry at her, at the world, and if I'd had criminal intentions, I would have done something violent. But I know what prison is like, even if it's just the local county lockup. I sat there until 2 in the morning, when the lights came back on. A few minutes later, her lover came out the front door, turned around, kissed her, waved at her, and walked to his car while Paige told him to be quiet. Like I said, if I'd been a violent man, Derek would be in trouble right now. Instead, I started the truck, headlights off, pulled onto the road, and drove to a motel in town. For the next 2 weeks, I repeated these surveillance visits with the same results. The following week, I decided it was time to end it. This time, they got home a little early. As the bedroom light came on, I crossed the road, stopped at his car, and flattened all 4 tires. I also flattened one of Paige's tires. I didn't need money leaving the account beyond what was necessary. By the time I got to the back of the house, the nightlights were on and the bedroom window was up to allow cool air to circulate in the house. I entered the house through the back door, and after turning on the video on my phone, I slowly walked back to the bedroom. I turned on the lights, and the surprised expressions on their faces were priceless. "This looks like one hell of a situation to me," I told them both. He was stumbling around, not realizing what was going on. Paige was just in shock at being discovered and was crying hard. I gestured to the firearm clipped to my belt and ordered him to get out. He grabbed his clothes and sprinted past me, saving what he thought was his life. I heard the door close behind him, and then he screamed, "Jesus! My car!" He'd discovered the flat tires. Whatever or wherever he went, he didn't come back to the house. "Ethan, please let me explain. I know there's a book of explanations for every situation like this, but when you get to the last page, it just says guilty painted on it." "Paige, shut the hell up and listen to me. Tell me how long. I only need one number. Tell me how many times you've been with him." "Ethan, please hear me out," she cried. "One number. How many times? How many goddamn times? I'll ask you again if it doesn't get into your stupid head. Just once, I swear," she cried again. "Jesus, what a goddamn relief," I said, leaving the bedroom and heading back to the kitchen for a cold beer. The beer went down smoothly as I stood there looking at her, wrapped in an old pink robe. I finished my beer and opened another before heading outside. Derek was nowhere to be seen, and the moonlight reflected off the hood of his car with 4 flat tires. I grinned to myself, proud of my manly stance. I'd already cried it all out a couple of weeks ago. Now all that was left was to get down to business. I drove my truck out of the field across the street and parked it behind the house before thinking of another option. I had a tow hitch for hauling cargo in the barn, and I strapped Derek's car to the hitch and set off on the 5-mile trek to Roanoke. About 1.5 miles down the road, I passed him with the car on all 4 wheels flat to the rims behind me. Upon reaching Roanoke, near the Salvation Army store, I left his car in the parking lot and headed home. Paige was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in. "Ethan, can we talk about this? Please." I looked at her and simply said, "Not today," and took the remaining 6 bottles and went into my workshop. It's a man cave for mechanics, and in the attic I've put together a pretty decent place to rest. With some music playing in the background, I finished the remaining beer and fell asleep. The next day, I called and let my boss know I had some problems on the home front and went to the house to deal with it. "Paige, you need to move out and stay with your sister. You're the one who messed this up." Surprisingly, she didn't argue. Maybe she thought saying it was just a one-time thing helped her. After the 2 of them changed the flat tires, her sister came over and helped load a bunch of stuff into both cars before they left. The sister, Kelsey, came out to the workshop to talk to me. I had always liked her, and I didn't hold a grudge against her for being a relative. "Ethan, are you going to take her back? Did you know she was cheating on you?" Kelsey shook her head and brushed away a tear. "You two were always very good together. I really hate to see this happen." "Me too, sister. Me too." I hugged her, and the 2 of them drove down the road. The next day, I filed the divorce papers, and all hell broke loose. It started with Paige, then her parents, then my parents, my siblings, and so on and so forth. Everyone thought we could work things out and everything would be fine. It was all a one-time mistake. "Paige, tell everyone the truth, or I'll send out videos and pictures from previous encounters to everyone. You damn well know." I think she went into shock at the revelation that I knew about the previous encounters. Nevertheless, she said something to them because the excuses had changed. Now it was the young people make mistakes all the time excuse, and we were young and could work things out. Maybe have a kid or 2. It was constant, incessant. Eventually, I stopped taking calls unless they were work-related. I told Paige to take whatever she needed from the house when I was at work. I was going to keep the house and buy out her share. There would be no alimony, and everything we had, we'd put into the house except for the small pension we each got from work. Basically, it was simple. It was so simple that 6 months later, we were officially divorced, though the trying and pleading to be together again never stopped. Paige used to track me down at restaurants and slide into the booth or belly up to the bar where I was sitting. Her sister Kelsey would stop by 2 or 3 times a week just to talk and feed me. For a while, I thought she had decided to try her luck with me herself, but that wasn't the case. I finally decided to resort to an unconventional way to end it all. I called Lisa and asked if she wanted to go to the dance hall on Preston Avenue on Friday night. She agreed and ended up spending the entire weekend at my house. I underestimated this woman. She completely wore me out and left me with a smile on my face for the entire week. Of course, one of the reasons I chose Lisa, on top of everything else, was that I also knew she wouldn't be able to keep her mouth shut to save her life. You could be sure that she kept a detailed account of everything we did, just to score points with her work clique, which, as far as I knew, still included Paige. It worked out better than I expected. The next weekend came, and on Friday night I went to the dance hall alone. Paige had apparently switched to day shifts because she was there with several members of the old crew, and lo and behold, there she was with Derek. I've never understood how women think. I guess it's an occupational hazard of being a man. Paige, her sister, her parents, and everyone else I could remember, with the exception of a few interested women with other plans in mind, had been devising ways to convince me to somehow get her back. And yet here she was with Derek himself. I took a seat at the bar and sipped a cold beer, watching the couples on the floor. Soon, Paige and Derek slipped out there and put on an intimate show for someone else's benefit. I guessed it was for me. When they were done, Derek went back to his table, and Paige walked over to the bar. "It doesn't have to be this way, Ethan." "What way?" "We're not together anymore. We're free to be with other people." "I'm here alone," I said defiantly, looking around. Paige's throat reddened a little. I'd realized early on in our marriage that this was a sign she was about to explode, so I interrupted her. I leaned over and whispered in her ear. "Listen good, Paige. I don't care what that guy does at your place. You've been with him a long time, and you can keep running to him. I'm sure you know I had a good time with your friend Lisa last weekend." She jerked back and slapped me hard, then burst into tears. Derek got up from the table and headed for the bar, but had another thought when I raised my hand at him. "See that guy you're with right now?" I said loud enough for him to hear. He froze in place. "The only thing he's interested in is having a good time. Nothing more. That's all he's ever been interested in, and you gave him what belonged to me. Over and over again. You took what was special between us and brought that sorry excuse into our bed, into our lives. So now live with it. I'm moving on." With those words, I finished the rest of my beer and walked out of the place. She ran out after me crying, but I just started my truck and drove off. I ended up at another bar downtown, sipping a local ale and watching people live their lives. I found out later that Paige had left with a girlfriend right after me, and according to people in the know, she doesn't go out as much as she used to. I didn't go out with Lisa again, though I was tempted. She really was something. Instead, I plunged back into my work. Paige and Kelsey kept approaching me whenever they could, although I think Kelsey realized it was a lost cause. The other thing was the parents, hers and mine. My parents continued to invite Paige to barbecues even when I wasn't around. She was the daughter they never had for them, and they didn't want to let her go. I think we all changed some aspects of our lives as a result of the divorce and its aftermath. For me, it was going back to the woods. Growing up in the Blue Ridge and the national forests gave me a sense of belonging, a kind of identity. I wasn't a redneck, whatever that means, and I wasn't a city boy either. I guess I was a mountain man at heart. So I changed my habits. When I drove on my route, I used to take the interstate or cross the quicker highways. Instead, I started taking the Old Thunder Road through the mountains, the Blue Ridge Parkway. It was a little longer, but in good weather it was a beautiful ride, and sometimes I could stop and cast a fishing line into the creek along the way. How I didn't see that neat white house on the Virginia side on all those trips, God only knows. But one day I did. I had just finished cutting the grass and set the mower down and was sipping a cold beer when my phone rang in my pocket. "Hello, Ethan? Hi, this is Miranda Hartwell from Galax. You stopped by my place last week to get your truck fixed." I remembered. Hell, for the past few days, I couldn't get her out of my head. There was something about her that made me feel comfortable, even though I'd only met and talked to her for a few hours. I'd been meaning to call her about that '57 Ford for a while now with some new information. "Hello, Miss Miranda. I never forget a gracious hostess. I was going to call you in a day or two about your old Ford." "Yes, that's exactly what I was calling about. That and the others. You made me think about them again, and I decided to do something about them. I thought maybe you might want to stop by here next time you're in the area and help me figure out what my next step should be." There were 11 old cars on that lot, and all of them, as far as I could tell, were in very good condition body and frame-wise. The next steps were simple: appraise them and sell them. She already knew this, so the invitation was clearly personal. I'm heading up there next Thursday, but to tell you the truth, I wouldn't mind a ride in the mountains tomorrow. Sunday promises to be beautiful, I offered, with a mixture of prayer and hope. 30 minutes later, I was already sitting in the chair of a barbershop in Roanoke, getting a haircut and grabbing a nice Cabernet on the way home. I'm mostly a beer drinker, but I can tell a good red wine from a bad one. At 9 o'clock the next morning, I hit the road on a familiar route on a beautiful day. As I crossed the Big Creek Bridge, fishermen were working both sides of the water, and if I hadn't had a date waiting, I would have stopped longer. Just as I pulled up to the spot, a kid was pulling out a nice 1-pound brook trout that he'd caught on what looked like some version of a fly. I made a mental note and headed back down the road. When I pulled up to Miss Miranda's house, she was standing at the front door, talking animatedly with some man, while her 2 dogs sat at attention and watched every move. Another man was sitting in a pickup truck, watching the whole scene. I parked my truck and walked up the driveway. The conversation between them grew louder as I got within a few feet. Travis told me I could have this 65 in exchange for some work I did for him a couple of months ago. For crying out loud, the man said to Miranda. Well, I don't know anything about that, and from what I understand, Travis was done with everything here over 2 years ago. So if he owes you anything, you'll have to deal with him, not me. Wait a minute, he started to answer before I cut in. Good morning, Miss Miranda. Is everything okay here? She looked at me with a hint of apprehension on her face before answering. Everything's fine, Ethan. This gentleman was just leaving. The man looked at me, and I could see the anger in his eyes, but I just smiled and wished him a good day. We watched as he climbed back into his truck and pulled out onto the road, heading back toward Galax. So what was that all about? I asked. I think my ex-husband is causing me problems. He can't drive onto the property. In fact, he can't even drive down that road in front of the house because there's a restraining order against him. I grinned to myself and said, How convenient. Oh, before I forget, I brought a bottle of wine, a 2012 Cabernet, if you'd like to put it in the fridge for a bit. She smiled graciously, and we returned to the porch with the dogs in tow. After the wine was put away, we settled on the porch and talked about inventorying the old cars by the barn. Along with the 57 Ford and the 65 Fairlane, there was a 67 Barracuda, a 69 Olds 442, and a 48 Caddy, along with a half-dozen other unremarkable sedans. It wasn't a bad collection if she got a fair price for them. I know someone who would pay a pretty decent price for that 57 in the condition it's in now. I think you could get at least 8,000, maybe 10,000 if it's still strong, I told her. Tell them I'm interested, she replied. We chatted some more about the rest of them, and I arranged to talk to an acquaintance in Roanoke who did a lot of this sort of thing. I thought he might be willing to sell them on commission to ensure a fair price. Once everything was taken care of, I was treated to a culinary feast, fried chicken with all the condiments. After everything was cleaned up and put away, we took a walk through the pasture and into the mountain forest behind her house. It's a beautiful area here, a combination of farmland and mountains, and there's as much greenery as there is anywhere on God's earth. At one point, we stopped along a small babbling brook and paused to look around. So, Ethan, what's your story? Married, single, in a relationship, divorced? You know, where you've been and where you're going. Damn, I didn't know what to say, so I told her the truth, at least the simplified version of it. I told her about catching Paige with another man and how it ruined our marriage. She learned about how Paige and her sister, her parents, my parents, and all of our friends had tried to get me back with her. I even told her about going out with Lisa just to make Paige realize it was over. I also mentioned how my parents still treated Paige like a daughter. Miranda listened without comment. When I was done, she said simply, That must be hard. It was for a while, but I'm getting over it. What about you? What's your story with Travis? She told me how they'd met, how charming he'd been at first, and how things had slowly changed. She told me about the woman in Galax who turned out not to be as interesting as Travis thought. She didn't know he was married, and when she found out Miranda was his wife, She dropped him like a hot potato. Jesus, that's something, I said. She came here one day while Travis was at work and confessed everything, apologizing to me the whole time. We'd known each other since high school, but we'd never run in the same circles. Apparently, Travis didn't take no for an answer. The girl went to Texas to stay with her dad, in no small part because of Travis's constant harassment. Went to Texas? He followed her there. She called and told me about it, and that's when I put all his stuff on the porch and called him to come get it before it rained on everything. He came back 2 days later, broke into the house when I wasn't there, made a mess, and took his junk back inside. What did you do? When I got home that night with Ranger and Scout, I had him cornered with both dogs while I cleaned up all his crap and put it back on the lawn. My dogs know who their mommy is, really. She rubbed the fur and collars of both dogs as they sat at her feet, sticking their tongues out again and watching me. The next day, Daddy and I went to the lawyer's office and got a restraining order against him. A couple of days later, he was served at work. The next week, he was back in Texas again, stalking that poor girl. I still talk to her sometimes. Nice girl, but she's smart enough to tell him where to go. For all I know, he's living in some woman's trailer somewhere in Texas now. If Miranda was hurting from the experience, she didn't show it. With a huge smile on her face, she said, "Kicking that bastard out was the best thing I ever did." We talked some more after that, and I found out that Miranda had settled down quite well after the divorce. She worked as a nurse midwife throughout much of Eastern Virginia, mostly in the foothills. The farm she lived on she'd inherited from her grandmother years ago, and had grown a small 3-acre plot of tobacco before the divorce. After Travis left, there was no one to care for it, so she'd let it go. Back at the house, I took a close look at the old cars by the barn and took pictures to show my friend. Since it was getting late and I had to go to work in the morning, we parted with a very pleasant hug, and she broke the embrace with a long kiss on the cheek. I'll probably drop in on you again this week, maybe Thursday, if I hear back from my friend in Roanoke. If I'm not here, I'll be very disappointed, Mr. Ethan McAllister. I'll call you to let me know. She smiled. That late Sunday afternoon, I set out again for the Blue Ridge Parkway like a kid with his first crush in the schoolyard. It was a sort of half-date, not exactly a date, but something other than just socializing. For me, Thursday couldn't come fast enough. On Tuesdays, the barbecue joint offered fried catfish with all the trimmings for $9.99 plus drinks. Thin fried strips of fish, coleslaw, potato salad, and hush puppies, which were the best in the state. Paige and I used to go there often, but this evening I went in alone and took a vacant booth to read the paper while I ate. I hadn't even started my meal yet when they walked in, noticed me, and all 3 of them slipped into my booth. "Look at that. It's the long-lost traveler," Dad said to me, sliding into my side of the booth. Mom and Paige sat down across from me. I'd be lying if I said Paige didn't look good. She looked better than just fine, and she knew I knew it too. "I assume you guys just happen to be here when I'm sitting like this?" I asked no one in particular. "We come every Tuesday, Ethan. You know that," said Mom. Paige just smiled and turned on that sparkle in her eyes. On top of the fact that she was sitting there all dressed up, it made her look even better. "That's right. Catfish Tuesday and brisket Thursday. The best in all of Virginia. Right here," piped up Dad. Okay, I was cornered, and I knew it. So we all filled our plates at the counter and sat down to eat. I think there was a contest to see who could eat the most. For me, it was probably the most awkward meal I'd had in a long time, but for the 3 of them, it was just like old times. "Isn't this great? I remember all 4 of us gathering here every week," said Mom with a wide smile on her face. Paige just brightened up. I just had to go to the bathroom. When I came back, Dad started to get up to let me back in, but I gently put my hand on his shoulder. "Oh, you don't have to, Dad. I've got an early morning and I need to get going. I'll stop by soon, I promise." I tossed a 20 on the table, smiled, wished everyone a great night, even Paige, and headed out the door with a satisfied grin on my face. It was only 6:30 in the evening. 30 minutes later, I was already at another bar with a cold pint of beer. The place had always been a favorite hangout, but until recently, it hadn't had any live entertainment unless you counted the local drunks who wandered in by mistake. A couple of months earlier, the owners had added live music on Saturday nights and plenty of room to dance. It wasn't Paige and her associates' favorite place, so I started coming here regularly. Besides, it was a great place to meet friendly people with similar inclinations. That night, the bartender was working the bar and pouring me my usual double IPA while I admired the scenery. There were a few girls playing pool and the usual assortment of guys sipping their early evening pints and watching the game on the screen above the bar. "Long time no see, stranger. How you doing?" she asked over her shoulder, taking a seat next to me. She looked damn good, as usual. But Lisa always looked good, damn good and perfect for a slow evening like this. I hadn't gone out with her since that first time. I'd wanted to encourage Paige to move on with her life. Obviously, it hadn't worked. "Well, Lisa, I'm doing great. And you look like life is treating you well too." I praised her sincerely. "I think I'm doing okay. Things have been a little slow lately, but having you here gives a girl hope." At those words, she patted my thigh. I bought her a beer, and we sat down at a table in the corner next to the girls playing pool. We chatted about what was going on, and I learned that the old crew still got out on the weekends sometimes, and even Paige joined in the festivities. I didn't ask, and Lisa didn't offer any details about who my ex was currently seeing. It was none of my business. But the longer I sat with her, the more I realized who I wanted to spend the evening with. After a couple of hours, we left together. She didn't have to go to work the next morning, so she stayed over at my house. "Ethan, I know you and I aren't going to be a couple or anything, but I'd like to keep things casual once in a while. Are you okay with that?" After the previous evening's company, I was sure it was a good idea. "I'm fine with it, as long as neither of us are in a serious relationship." That same day, Miranda called to let me know she would be home Thursday afternoon and evening unless she was called away for an unexpected delivery. That call really brightened my day. I contacted my friend in Roanoke, and after looking at his email, I saw that Miranda was going to pull off a nice score if she accepted his offer. When I got home that night, all hell broke loose at Ethan McAllister's house. Lisa had made herself at home that morning, as I'd suggested, and around lunchtime, Paige and my mom stopped by on some pretext. It wasn't the first time she'd done this. She'd made up a whole list of excuses, or my mom might have stopped by on some errand. It didn't matter if I was there or not. It was pretty clear what Lisa was there for, or at least it was when I arrived. Paige was confused, I guess. She just wasn't prepared for another woman showing up at the house that used to be her home. The two of them had words while my mom tried to intervene. Other than a few strands of hair pulled and smeared makeup, no one was particularly hurt. Someone knocked over a potted plant, but that was pretty much all the physical damage. About half an hour after I got home, they drove into the yard. Mom, Dad, and Paige. I don't know what they were going to do, but I straightened up and waited for them to come in. Mom started first. "Ethan, I don't know what kind of house you're running, but having women running through it at all hours of the day and night is inappropriate." Dad just sat there and kept quiet because he knew better. I looked questioningly at Paige and then at Mom. "Okay then, how old am I, Mom?" 30. "And how long have I been living on my own?" "Since you turned 19, I think." "That's right, since I was 19. And I've lived in this house since I was 24, right?" She nodded in agreement. "And I was a married man, Mom." "Well, you were, and you should be." I interrupted her. That's true. But now I'm not. Do you see how it works now?" Next question. "Who are these women you're talking about, Mom?" I ask this because, as far as I know, there was only one woman living in this house before, and I caught her with another man. So who are these women running through my house? I'd like to know. Mom and Paige sat on the couch, stunned, and couldn't say anything. Dad started to mumble something about not talking to Mom like that, but stopped before he buried himself too deep. So I continued. "Let me be honest about a few things. I pretty much own this place, and as a 30-year-old adult who isn't married to anyone or a monk or anything like that, I enjoy a little company every now and then. You can always have me." Paige cried big tears. I just laughed and took another sip of my beer. "I had you, and look how that turned out. Okay, here's how it's going to be. I don't want anyone coming into my house in the middle of the day when I'm not here. I didn't make a big deal about it before, But now I'm telling you all. I'll change the locks if I can't trust you. One more thing. If I have guests you don't like, don't come back at that time. Come another time and we'll grill a burger or something. But if I've got company in my single man's house, what do you think it's like when Mom and Dad try to interrupt? I grinned, looking at the three of them. Any of you want to grab a beer or something? You too, Paige? Mom and Dad got themselves something to drink and pulled some cold chicken out of the fridge. I took Paige out to my workshop. Look, I'm going to be blunt. You have no reason to come into my house anymore. And no say in the company I keep or anything else going on in my life. Paige. None. You're seeing someone right now. I know. I never realized. Why do you think it's okay if some guy is with you? But you get upset if someone else gets the love you threw away for Derek. You did this to us, Paige. Not me. I have no idea who you're with now, and frankly, I don't care. So it boils down to this. You need to start being civil and get on with your life, and stop trying to interfere with mine through my own parents. I know they love you and you love them. I understand that, but I want you to get off Lisa's back. She hasn't done anything to you, and I haven't done anything to you for that matter. She lowered her eyes to the ground, and when she looked up at me, I saw pain in them. I knew she still loved me, but despite that, she'd continued to cheat on me even as she tried to supposedly win me back. We went back into the house, and Mom and Dad were leaning back in their chairs watching some old TV show. By the time they all left, I was done. Aside from Lisa's phone call, I needed to apologize for the family commotion. The next day during lunch at the local diner, Kelsey sat down in the booth across from me. Hi, Ethan. You're looking good, as always. As I've noted before, I've always liked Kelsey and appreciated her kindness. I was talking to Paige this morning, and she told me about this episode, as she put it, yesterday. I think she understands, Ethan. I really do. I hate that it ended like this, and you know how I feel. Hell, if you weren't my brother-in-law, and you always will be, I'd stand up for you myself. I'll try to steer her down a different path and see what happens. But like I said, what you talked about must have gotten through to her because she told me she was going to move on. That's good to hear, Kelsey, and I appreciate your support. You know I've always loved her, but I could never accept what she did. Yeah, she knows that. She's been hung up on that scumbag since you met her. But I think she realizes now that he cost her everything. I just nodded, and we chatted some more before she left to go back to work. I picked up the bill and headed for the mountains to drive to Virginia. Miranda was tending the garden when I arrived at her place on Thursday, and the dogs, as expected, announced my arrival. It was damn hot that day, and she was dressed accordingly, very short cut-off jeans and a tight tank top. Nothing else. I did my best not to stare at her figure showing through the thin fabric. She ran out to meet me and hugged me before we went inside to make cold drinks. Now my little ones like you. She pointed to the panting dogs lying on the kitchen floor. I wish they'd tell me that themselves, I joked. She made herself an iced tea and handed me an iced beer. After a few minutes, we went over the details of selling her car collection. A friend of mine in Roanoke had offered to auction them off for an 8% commission with a guaranteed $65,000 per lot. I decided that was a good deal for the condition they were in, and Miranda agreed. Once we were done with that, we settled on the porch, enjoying drinks in the afternoon heat. Want to go swimming? She asked with a smirk on her face. Daddy dug it wider and deeper a couple of years ago, and it's a pretty good pond, especially on a day like this. I didn't bring my swim trunks. You don't need them. There's no one around. Well, I'm not shy, and I know I have no body flaws, so I agreed, trying to wipe the huge grin off my face. We grabbed a couple of beers and towels and headed to the back of the property. When we got there, Miranda just pulled off her shorts and top, threw them on a branch, and jumped into the pond fed by the creek. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little hesitant, but I just shrugged and started pulling off my clothes. When I was as undressed as Miranda was, I threw myself into the pond and waded into the water up to my shoulders. Miranda was standing next to me with a wide, happy smile on her face. I used to come here as a little girl when my grandmother lived here. We'd both jump in the water and take a dip on hot days like this. Great memories. There were a couple of boys who lived down the road who used to spy on us girls until my grandmother had her dog stand guard. The closest I ever got to a swimming spot as a kid was when a couple of us would go to a creek and jump in the water, but the water there was cold. I laughed, remembering that. I dove under the water and swam for a bit before surfacing next to Miranda. When I surfaced, our faces were only a few inches apart, and I looked directly into her moist blue eyes. The next instant, her arms wrapped around my neck. "I like you, Ethan McAllister. I really like you." She looked up at me. "Miss Miranda, I've had a crush on you like a schoolboy since the first time we met." "Good. You can take me out to eat this evening instead of eating at home." With those words, we swam some more and pulled ourselves out of the pond. After drying off and getting back to the house, we headed to Galax itself. I have to say, there aren't many restaurant options in Galax, but there is a good steakhouse and they have great brisket, so that's where we headed. They gave us a nice table out of the way, and I had the best dining experience I'd had in a long time, all thanks to the company of the woman I was with. I don't think there was anything we didn't talk about at some point, and by the time we got out of there it was getting dark and I still needed to get her home. We pulled into the gravel lot around 9:30, and I walked her to the door and kissed her while Ranger and Scout stared at us. "You don't have to go back to Roanoke tonight, Ethan. I've got the guest room ready. You can have a hearty breakfast and hit the road as early as you like." Her smile convinced me, and after calling the inn and canceling my evening reservation, I spent the night in her guest room. In the morning, she sent me off to work after feeding me an old-fashioned country breakfast. This time, I made a date for Saturday afternoon and dinner in a nearby town. Saturday night, we spent the night at a bed and breakfast. Miranda was very different from the previous women in my life, especially Paige and, of course, Lisa. She was sensual. I don't know where she learned that, but I realized even then that her ex-husband was a damn fool. From that point on, we started courting each other and continued our semi-remote meetings, staying at her place more often and occasionally taking Miranda's car to Roanoke. I met her dad, who regarded me with some wariness until Miranda spoke to him privately. I don't know what she said to him, but from then on, he was always friendly to me. One bright and sunny Saturday morning, wetting a dry fly on the ripples of Big Creek, I made the decision to take the next big step in my life. As soon as that thought entered my mind, the line on my fly fishing rod tightened hard, and the jerk of the reel chased the line until I caught it with my thumb, and the fight was on. After a few minutes of enjoying the game, I pulled out a 1.5-pound brown trout. It was a good sign for me and confirmation that life was going well. Later in the afternoon, Miranda and I returned to Roanoke and decided to spend the evening in Charlottesville. As it turned out, we ended up at the dance hall on Preston Avenue where I'd so often spent evenings with my old group of friends. I didn't have much contact with my old group of friends, including Lisa, after I developed a serious relationship with Miranda. It had to be cut short for a while. Well, I should have known that I would run into a lot of acquaintances. Lisa was there with her current boyfriend, as well as a few people from the old gang, including a few from the hospital where Lisa and Paige still worked. I could see her from across the floor. Paige was with some guy I didn't know and looked happy. Paige had done her best to move on with her life and had even apologized to me for ruining our marriage. My parents still treated her like a daughter, and frankly, it didn't bother me one bit. Of course, she didn't know I was in a serious relationship, and this was the first time she'd seen me with Miranda. Miranda and I had danced a few numbers and were socializing at the bar when Paige came up behind me. "Hi, stranger," she said to me as I turned around. "Hey, Paige, you look good." I didn't see her companion anywhere nearby. "Neither do you, Ethan. Your mom and dad said you're doing well and spending a lot of time working in Virginia. I'm happy for you. I really am." I introduced her to Miranda, and there was a hint of sadness in her eyes, but she was good at hiding it from others. At least it seemed that way to me. We hugged lightly, and she went back to the group she was with. The next moment, I felt myself getting a blow to the head. Miranda shrieked, "No, Travis, you can't do that." But it was too late. He swung at me again, and I put him down with a right punch. Miranda cried, and then, to my surprise, Paige came running over and bent down to help the man lying on the floor. "Jesus, Ethan, what the hell?" asked Paige. I looked at her and tried to grasp the connection before I realized it was the guy she'd been with earlier. "Honey, this is my ex-husband, Travis," whispered Miranda to me. "Paige," he attacked Ethan. "Not the other way around," she told her. By then, the bouncers had picked him up off the floor and carried him out the door, and Paige had excused herself to the restroom. Miranda and I went back to the bar and the 2 fresh drinks that were waiting for us, courtesy of the establishment. "Now you know why I had a restraining order." "He's crazy," she said. I just agreed and tried to dismiss the thought. This episode marred our evening somewhat, and as we were just about to leave, Paige approached us again. Miranda explained who Travis was and what he'd done, and Paige almost cried since he'd been her companion for the evening. Amazing coincidence or not, she was without a car, and the 2 of us agreed to drive her to her sister Kelsey's house. As we were leaving, Paige stopped to wave goodbye to someone, and Miranda and I left the building and headed for the parking lot. Paige was just coming out behind us and catching up to us when I saw a white flash and a loud pop in front of me. I dropped to the ground and immediately returned fire. Travis Bowden slumped over on the spot. I began feeling myself to determine if I had been shot. I felt no pain or impact, so I assumed the drunken fool had missed me. At that moment, Miranda screamed in panic. "Oh my God!" I turned around. Paige was lying on her back. Security was already rushing to the scene when I approached her and realized she was still alive and semi-conscious. Some people compare this experience to time standing still, but it was more like watching a movie and being somewhat detached from the events. A woman asked me to step aside and started administering first aid, and after a few moments, which seemed like moments to me but were actually a few minutes, an EMT arrived and took over. They took her to the hospital and we followed them. At one point, it occurred to me to call Kelsey to let her know what had happened and ask her to come to the hospital. When she arrived, Paige had already been moved to the operating room, and we sat in the surgery room, waiting for someone to tell us something. Eventually, a nurse came out to us and told us that Paige was still in surgery, and that it would be another long night before they knew exactly what condition she was in. For now, her condition was critical. Miranda and Kelsey were left alone while I went to get food, and when I returned, they were both waiting by the window, holding hands. Kelsey was in a terrible state, but after we got some food into her, we all settled down nearby and waited for the operation to finish. 3 hours had passed when the doctor came out to share his prognosis. Right now, she is in the ICU and we think she will live. The extent of her injuries will not be known until she comes out of the induced coma we put her in so her body can recover. The bullet fragmented on impact, but some of it grazed the medial temporal lobe, which may affect some types of memory. We won't know until later, but from what we discovered during surgery, her motor functions shouldn't be affected. Obviously, we'll know more over the next few days. We were allowed a few minutes of quiet time with her, and Miranda and I spent the evening comforting my distraught sister-in-law. The next morning, the doctors gave Kelsey and her parents the latest news. It was basically the same as the previous night. Paige remained in an induced coma for 4 days. When she was awakened, Kelsey and her parents were there, and the first person she asked to see was me. Before I went to the hospital to see her, Kelsey brought me up to speed. She has good speech and hearing, although her right eye is still a little clouded, but the doctors think that will pass with time. The thing is, she's lost some of her memory. She has no idea how or where she was shot or by whom. You need to prepare for that, Ethan. She thinks she's still married to you. It's like nothing has happened in the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, seriously, she thinks you two are getting ready to have a bunch of kids. And because of this, you're going to have to put it off for a couple of months or so. At that point, I didn't know what to think and even considered not going to the hospital. But Miranda, in her wisdom, didn't want to listen to anything like that. She went there with me but stayed downstairs in the hall while I went up to the room. Paige looked terrible, but she was conscious and resting. Her parents had just gone downstairs, and Kelsey was sitting on the other side of her. She wasn't wasting any time. "Ethan, where are my wedding rings? I know I wore them yesterday morning, or whenever, before all this happened." Kelsey only looked at me sadly, as if hoping I could answer, as if I was still her husband. I really didn't know what to do. The problem was that I was in love, and the engagement ring was sitting in my bedroom dresser, waiting for an opportunity that I thought was going to materialize a few days ago. Paige, do you know what date or year it is? I asked her sincerely in a soft voice. Well, it must be July 2012, but my doctor tells me it's not, and I just don't understand it. I shifted my gaze to Kelsey and asked, You didn't tell her? She just shook her head with tears in her eyes. Paige, don't worry about your rings right now. It's more important that you get better and hopefully get some of your memory back. I tried to smile, but my concerned expression seemed to get in the way. Paige wanted to take my hand as I sat there, and I didn't object, though my mind was going into overdrive trying to realize the implications of all of this. We talked about a lot of things, both family and her recovery, but I avoided the elephant in the room. Later, in the waiting area, I talked to Kelsey and Paige's doctor about the prognosis for her memory. She seemed to be fine with most of her memories. She recognized family and friends but had difficulty connecting dates and events together. Many things she had no memory of, including her infidelity and divorce. Is there any chance she'll regain those memories? I asked the doctor. That's always hard to predict. Maybe some person or place will trigger the memories. We'll have to see. I can't tell you how to proceed, Mr. McAllister. All I can say is it's 50-50 one way or the other. She could stay where she is or she could get it all back. We just don't know. I thanked the doctor and gave Kelsey a big hug. I also told her that I had planned to propose to Miranda the night Paige was shot but didn't have time. She said that Miranda had already told her that. I guess I wasn't as good at keeping secrets as I thought I was. In fact, I already knew what I was going to do. All that was left was to go downstairs and do it. The twin Can-Am Spyder F3s raced down the gravel surface of the old Blue Ridge Parkway with the wind in their hair and a mile of dust behind them. As we approached the Big Creek Bridge, we stopped at a rest area to take a break and wet the fishing line for a chance to catch a big brown trout. Suffice it to say, it's still roaming those same waters today. A lot has happened in the past year since Paige was shot and Travis Bowden met his end after our confrontation in Charlottesville. I sold my home in Roanoke, and the company let me work out of the regional office in Galax, my choice. I moved into an extra room in Miranda's farmhouse. Since most of my work was during the daytime, it was manageable. Miranda works almost full-time as a midwife, but last May, we took 2 weeks off to enjoy the sunshine together in Key West. Ethan and Miranda McAllister returned semi-rested, tanned, and ready to start their new life together. A year ago, as I took the elevator down to Miranda in the hospital lobby, I thought back to my failed marriage and what might lie ahead, and it was a very simple decision. I had already moved on. Why should I throw away the happiness I had now for someone who was still a cheater, even if she didn't remember any of it? Hell, I know drunks who remember nothing the next day and remain the same person they were the day before. Kelsey made it easy for me. She sat Paige down and explained life to her. She even brought in my old nemesis Derek to see if it would jog her memory, but to no avail. Eventually, Paige accepted the truth even if she didn't remember it, and I think it eventually caused her a lot of remorse. She went through a period of depression. And then my angel did something amazing. One weekday afternoon, Miranda traveled to Roanoke on her own. I was on a business trip and knew nothing about it. She told me about it a couple of months later. Ethan, I felt I had to do something. I want you to imagine how you would feel if the same thing happened to you and the woman you love ran off out of the blue with no explanation to marry some other guy. I don't know exactly how I would have reacted, but I'm sure it would have been pretty much the same thing Paige experienced. She knew that her husband, or the man who used to be her husband, was in love with a woman and was planning to marry her. It must have devastated her, and I can understand that. She knew too. She knows the truth and admits that it was her actions that plunged her into those depths of depression. I gave her a choice. Either wallow in self-pity and spend the rest of her life in misery because of what she had done, or move on with her life as she had before the shooting. The choice was hers. The benefit of moving on was her friendship with me, with us, with both of us. And that's exactly what she's doing. By the time we had cast our rods into the waters of Big Creek, 2 more Can-Am Spyders were parked next to us, and Paige and her significant other, with whom she had lived for the past 6 months, dismounted and joined us, trying to convince the big lurker to take another stab at it. Somehow, After going through all the struggles and turmoil of betrayal, divorce, trying to move on with our lives, and finding new love, Paige and I managed to come out of it all as friends. My parents still love her and often invite her to visit with her new partner. They have come to terms with reality and love Miranda as much as they do Paige. As for me, life is good right now, and the only problem looming on my horizon is how to fit the addition to our family in the back seat of the new two-seater Can-Am. Miranda told me last night that I'm going to be a daddy. Thank you for your viewing. See you next time. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to JK Tells a Story for more tales.